Videos from
What's the time?
in the computer. Intel. Give another 30 seconds. Start talking greeting.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
So today I'll be talking about acute kidney injury with specific respect to COVID-19. The exact incidence of acute kidney injury in patients with COVID-19 is not very clear. The incidence of acute kidney injury requiring renal replacement therapy in China was 3%, while the incidence in USA is pretty high, it's around 15%. The rate of acute kidney injury is often increased greatly in the setting of severe respiratory failure and acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is ARDS. Systemic inflammatory immune response in the face of a cytokine storm contributes to hypoperfusion related injury of the renal tubules in COVID-19. There also exists a possibility of a direct cytopathic effect of SARS-CoV-2. We know that the angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor and members of the serine protease family, which are essential for the viral uptake by host cells, are highly expressed on podocytes and the tubular epithelial cells in the kidney, and hence the kidney is vulnerable to direct attack by the virus, and this could be one of the reasons for acute kidney injury in COVID-19. Apart from these two contributory factors, one is the cytokine storm and the other is the direct viral effect, hypotension, cardiac failure due to myocarditis secondary to COVID, drug toxicity, radio contrast medium, superadded bacterial infections are the other contributory factors for acute kidney injury. So in any patient with a severe acute kidney injury due to COVID-19, renal replacement therapy should continue to be delivered in a safe and timely manner, at the same time minimizing exposure to the staff. Now today I will be just talking about the basics of acute kidney injury. So what is acute kidney injury? So I know that many of the participants are not physicians. Some of them are. Many of them are other groups. We have surgeons, we have orthopedicians, we have the outpatient doctors, for whom if I directly go on to the various modalities of dialysis and intricacies of dialysis, it is very daunting. So what I thought is, as a primary session, we cannot cover the entire acute kidney injury management in one session. So we will definitely have more sessions, and this session will only be an introductory session where you should know the basics of acute kidney injury. Okay, so the first thing is, what is acute kidney injury? Acute kidney injury is defined as any of the following: increase in serum creatinine by more than or equal to 0.3 milligrams per cent within the last 48 hours, or an increase in serum creatinine to more than or equal to 1.5 times baseline, which is known or presumed to have occurred within the last 7 days, or a urine volume of less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour for the last 6 hours. This is the definition given by KDIGO. KDIGO is Kidney Disease Initiative Global Outcome, which is a global non-profit foundation dedicated to improving the care and outcomes of kidney disease patients worldwide. So any patient whose urine output is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour for the last 6 hours, or an increase in creatinine by 0.3 milligrams per cent, or an increase from baseline of more than or equal to 1.5, they are supposed to be having an acute kidney injury. So this is the definition. So you need to monitor the urine volume, you need to know the serum creatinine. Okay, Now, this is the definition of AKI. We go to the severity of AKI. So there are 3 stages of AKI. Stage 1 is the mild stage. Stage 2 is moderately severe AKI. And stage 3 is a severe AKI. So this depends on both the serum creatinine and the urine output. Stage 1 AKI is where the creatinine is 1.5 to 1.9 times the baseline, or an increase of 0.3 milligrams. Stage 2 is 2 to 2.9 times increase compared to the baseline, and stage 3 is any creatinine which is thrice the baseline, or an absolute value of 4 milligrams percent, or the need to initiate renal replacement therapy. This is based on the creatinine. Based on the urine output, stage 1 or mild acute kidney injury is when the urine output is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour over the last 6 to 12 hours. Stage 2 is less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour for more than 12 hours. And stage 3 is less than 0.3 ml per kg per hour for more than or equal to 24 hours, or complete anuria for more than or equal to 12 hours. So once you know it's AKI, you find out whether it is mild, moderate, or severe. So this definition and severity of AKI is based on the RIFLE classification. As you know, RIFLE is risk, injury, failure, loss, and ESRD. And AKI, this is the acute kidney injury, AKIN. So the same thing, whatever the mild, moderate, and severe failure, it has been classified according to the RIFLE and AKIN criteria. Now, a word about interpretation of serum creatinine. So, increased blood urea nitrogen creatinine ratio. That means elevated urea with disproportionate decrease in creatinine occurs in pre-renal. That is when there is a severe dehydration, any bleeding from the GI tract, obstruction, when you give steroids. Yesterday, Dr. Sinha Roy told that steroids can be given in severe COVID. So the steroids themselves can elevate the urea, the creatinine might be normal, and tetracycline. Conditions where the urea, blood urea nitrogen is less, but the creatinine is high. This occurs in rhabdomyolysis and reduced protein intake. You can also have false elevation in serum creatinine secondary to ketone. So anybody with a DKA can have an elevated creatinine. Drugs like trimethoprim and cimetidine also cause elevation of the creatinine, whereas the urea would be normal. This is a false elevation. The rate of rise of creatinine is important rather than the absolute value. So when daily creatinine elevation starts to go down, that is a clue that the renal function has started to improve. Similarly, a creatinine on admission of 0.8 goes to 1.2 the next day. That is again a significant increase in creatinine of 50%, which is important. So the eGFR, which we calculate for chronic kidney disease, cannot be used for calculation of the GFR in acute kidney injury, because acute kidney injury is an unstable state, and the usual formulas which we use like a Cockcroft-Gault formula or a EPI or an MDRD equation will not hold good in these patients. So how do you estimate a serum creatinine? Some divisional hospitals like Madurai and Trichy have a lab which can estimate the serum creatinine. But the creatinine values would typically take 12 hours to 24 hours to come from the lab. And we are dealing with a highly critically ill patient. Whenever a COVID-19 patient goes into a AKI, the patient is highly critical and the mortality rate is very high, and corrective steps need to be taken immediately. So we need a point of care estimation of the blood parameters. So there are a few point of care machines from few companies which you will be procuring. And when you procure the machine, the cartridge should contain urea, creatinine, and electrolytes. Electrolytes mean sodium, potassium, chloride, and bicarbonate with hemoglobin. and also an ABG, because acidosis is a complication of renal failure, and we need an ABG to find out whether it is metabolic respiratory acidosis, whether it is a high anion gap acidosis, and all these issues. So when you buy a point of care machine to your COVID unit, you make sure that the cartridges are for an RFT, electrolytes, hemoglobin, and ABG. Because based on the creatinine and the urine output only, we diagnose acute kidney injury. So, but what are the limitations of serum creatinine? The limitations of serum creatinine are, as the GFR keeps falling from a normal of 120 milligrams up to 60 milligrams, 60 ml per minute, the serum creatinine actually does not rise. Only when the serum GFR falls below 60 to 40, there is a modest increase, and once the GFR falls below 40 only, the creatinine starts going up. So, we do not rely only on the creatinine, and in early stages, it is the urine output which is more important than the GFR. So, you should understand the fallacies of serum creatinine. The next. So now we will go. So now you know what is acute kidney injury. You will monitor the urine output, and you will see the serum creatinine by your point of care machine, and by the criteria. If the creatinine has gone up as per the criteria, or the urine output has dropped, you know that this patient is an acute kidney injury. That is the first step. You diagnose AKI. Once you have diagnosed AKI, how do you manage? Dialysis is the last thing, but early stages of AKI, you can manage with conservative measures and medical measures. So what all do you do? First thing, you discontinue all nephrotoxic agents whenever it is possible. Ensure that the volume status and the perfusion pressure of the patient are adequate. Consider functional hemodynamic monitoring. Monitor serum creatinine and urine output serially. It is not enough that we have one value alone. Avoid hyperglycemia. Any critically ill patient, the target blood sugars are 140 to 180, and we give insulin for management of hyperglycemia. Consider alternatives to radio contrast procedures. If you need to do a CT chest, do a plain HRCT. Try to avoid contrast. And then in the later stages of renal failure, you will do other non-invasive and invasive diagnostic workup. Once the patient is in established renal failure, each drug that the patient is getting, you have to see whether the drug is eliminated by the kidney, whether it needs a change in the drug dosing. Then renal replacement therapy is the last mode of treatment. Now the most important thing is nephrotoxins. So you will avoid all nephrotoxins in a patient who has already gone into AKI or who is in impending acute kidney injury. So you will avoid all NSAIDs. The patients are on all sorts of invasive. They will be on endotracheal tube. They'll be on ventilator. The viral infection per se causes a lot of myalgia, but we cannot give NSAIDs when the patient has gone into an acute kidney injury. You can give IV paracetamol. Avoid all aminoglycosides, by which I mean gentamicin, amikacin. Avoid even penicillins can worsen the renal failure. Acyclovir, other cytotoxic agents and radio contrast dye should be avoided. Now a word about the renal autoregulation and RAS inhibitors. So this is the normal glomerulus, this is the afferent arteriole, and this is the efferent arteriole. There is a difference in pressure between the afferent and efferent arteriole, which is the glomerular pressure. And because of this glomerular pressure, the glomerular filtration takes place, and that is how the renal function takes place. Now, in the presence of intravascular volume depletion or hypotension, the glomerular pressure will go down. When the glomerular pressure goes down, there are a lot of physiological activities which take place. Sympathetic drive increases, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is stimulated, prostaglandins are stimulated, and these prostaglandins cause a dilatation of the afferent arteriole. The renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, the angiotensin acts at the level of the vas efferens or the efferent arteriole, causing a preferential vasoconstriction. So there is a dilatation of the afferent arteriole and constriction of the efferent arteriole, thereby the glomerular pressure increases and the kidney continues to filter and the kidney continues to function. So this is called the auto-regulation of the kidney, irrespective of the external blood pressure. The change in arterial pressure might be 80 to 200, but the kidney will maintain the glomerular filtration rate and the renal blood flow relatively constant, even though the arterial blood pressure changes. And that is why every patient with intravascular volume depletion does not go into an acute kidney injury. The kidney will continue to function. When the blood pressure falls below 80, a mean arterial pressure of less than 60, that is when the kidney, the GFR will start falling and the patient goes into a renal failure. In COVID, the commonest cause of renal failure is either pre-renal AKI, or if the hypotension and volume status is not replenished, or due to the direct viral cytopathic effect, it can go into an acute tubular necrosis. So what do you do to prevent AKI? So you know that the patient is critically ill, hypotensive, and the urine output has started falling. You can have some medical measures by which the AKI can be prevented. So you have to hydrate the patient. You can use isotonic crystalloids. Yesterday, Dr. Sinha also told that colloids are not preferred. So first try to expand the intravascular volume and try to bring out the patient from AKI. Which fluid will you use? You can use normal saline, ringer lactate, or plasma light. There are some problems in using normal saline. If you see normal saline, if you see its constitution, it contains 154 milliequivalents of sodium and 154 milliequivalents of chloride, which is very, very high. On the other hand, ringer lactate has 109 milliequivalents of chloride and plasma light has 98. Why is chloride harmful? Excessive chlorine per se produces hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis, which leads to hyperkalemia, and this itself will worsen the renal injury. So you prefer ringer lactate or plasma light. Of course, plasma light is costly, but it is more kidney friendly. So if you know that a patient is going into an impending AKI, you can prefer plasma light over ringer lactate and ringer lactate over normal saline. So depending on the availability. So it is advisable that you make your ICU or a corona unit available with plasma light. So IV fluids is important. But on the other hand, you know that in managing a COVID patient, you should use a restrictive policy when you give fluids. In a normal AKI, when there is hypotension, we give lot of IV fluids. In fact, we have something called a saline challenge where we give around 1 to 2 liters of saline in a few hours. You cannot use that for a COVID patient because if you give indiscriminate fluids, the patient will go into a worsening respiratory distress and it might push his ARDS and need for ventilation very fast. So you have to be cautious while giving intravenous fluids in a COVID-19 patient. We will have further sessions on how to know what is the fluid deficit in a patient by non-invasive ways and how much of fluid you should give in a patient with COVID. That is an entirely topic in a critical care unit, point of care ultrasound and point of care test to assess whether the patient is dehydrated, how much dehydrated he is and how much of fluids we need to give. But remember that we should give fluids. You prefer crystalloids and you prefer plasma light or ringer lactate over saline. So that is about fluids. Even after giving fluids, if the blood pressure has not improved, next step is you use vasopressors. So which vasopressor do we use? So the vasopressor which we prefer is norepinephrine. So this study in the NEJM has clearly compared dopamine and norepinephrine, and it showed that for the kidney, norepinephrine is friendlier than dopamine. Patients who were put on dopamine had more need for renal support than patients who were put on norepinephrine. So you prefer norepinephrine. This idea of low dose dopamine being beneficial to the kidney is not true. It is not only not beneficial, but is associated with increased myocardial oxygen demand and increased incidence of atrial fibrillation. So do not use dopamine, use norepinephrine. With norepinephrine, if the BP is not getting controlled, you add vasopressin. You can use dobutamine if myocarditis is a predominant feature. So you use vasopressors and try to bring up the blood pressure. Once the mean arterial pressure improves, it is helpful for maintaining the renal perfusion. So fluids and vasopressors. Now, once AKI sets in, you need to think about the complications which occur with AKI. So the complications of AKI are, first is metabolic complications like acidosis, hyperkalemia, hypocalcemia, hyperphosphatemia, and other uremic features. Cardiovascular complications are fluid overload, hypertension, arrhythmias, pericarditis. Neurologically, it can cause neuropathy, dementia, seizures, uremic encephalopathy. Hematologically, anemia and coagulation abnormalities. GI, it can cause nausea, vomiting, and GI bleeding. These patients are more prone for any infection, UTI, catheter-related sepsis. So how do you manage fluid overload in AKI? So fluid overload, that is increase of 10% in the body weight, is an important complication. Those with fluid overload have more respiratory failure, mechanical ventilation, and sepsis. So mortality also increases as the fluid overload increases. So what is the role of diuretics in acute kidney injury? You use diuretics, furosemide or torsemide. They can induce diuresis in some patients with acute renal impairment. However, the diuretics do not per se alter the pathophysiology of acute renal failure. So you can convert a non-oliguric failure to non-oliguric failure, achieve some diuresis. More than that, diuretics are not useful. High dose can cause ototoxicity. The next complication of hyperkalemia. So any potassium which is more than 5.5 needs intervention. First step, stop all potassium supplementation. Stop medications which can cause hyperkalemia like beta blockers, potassium sparing diuretics, and put the patient on a cardiac monitor. Exclude pseudo hyperkalemia. That means if you have sent it to the lab, check with the point of care potassium estimation. If the patient is asymptomatic with normal ECG and potassium is between 5.5 to 6, you would use a potassium binding resin orally or a intravenous soda bicarb if there is severe metabolic acidosis. Routinely, we give nebulized salbutamol, but in a COVID-19 patient, you will avoid nebulization because it's an aerosol generating procedure. If the patient is symptomatic with a normal ECG and potassium is between 6 to 7, you start a glucose insulin. That is, you put 50% dextrose with around 8 to 10 and run it as an infusion. This will push the potassium into the cells. You can also use the potassium binding resins and bicarbonate if there is severe acidosis. If the patient is already hypotensive having an arrhythmia, or if the ECG is showing features of hypertension like tall T waves, prolonged PR interval, or an already ventricular tachycardia, you have to immediately stabilize the myocardium. So you have to give intravenous calcium gluconate, glucose insulin infusion, acidosis correction if there is severe acidosis, and consider the need for dialysis. Because hemodialysis is the fastest way to bring down the potassium. So this is the algorithm for hyperkalemia. Next complication is acidosis. So metabolic acidosis is a complication of AKI. If the pH is less than 7.2, you treat the metabolic acidosis. Any pH above 7.2 and the earlier management and giving the bicarbonate depending on the bicarbonate not only is it outdated, but it can be harmful. The current recommendation is to give 50 milliequivalents of soda bicarbonate diluted in 300 ml of sterile water over 30 to 45 minutes and monitor the pH. So if the pH has come to 7.2, you do not use more bicarbonate, and the goal is to increase the bicarbonate to 10 to 12 millimoles per liter and not to increase it to normal values. Can you please mute the mic? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So we discussed now how to manage fluid overload state, hyperkalemia and acidosis. So whenever the kidney has an AKA, it loses its autoregulatory capacity to regulate its own perfusion, and so it is very important that we maintain the hemodynamic stability and avoid volume depletion in AKA. So these are all the medical management of AKA. So when will you start thinking about renal replacement therapy in acute kidney injury? So whether or not to provide RRT and when to start are two of the fundamental questions facing nephrologists and critical care practitioners in severe AKA. There have been no large randomized controlled trials in this area, and so we are not still very sure when is the optimal timing for starting RRT. However, there are some guidelines. So whenever the patient has a severe acidosis which is life-threatening, when the pH is less than 7.2, or when the patient is already in severe pulmonary edema and the patient is not diuresing, or when there is a life-threatening hyperkalemia, as we saw when the potassium goes up to 7, the patient will develop a ventricular arrhythmia or a cardiac arrest and die. Or when there are severe uremic complications like a pericarditis or a bleeding, it is absolutely necessary that we correct all these so that the patient can survive. So these are all absolute indications for starting renal replacement therapy. These are the emergent indications. Non-emergent indications are for solute control. So whenever the patient is in renal failure and is not diuresing, the COVID sepsis is a catabolic state and you need to give lot of medications, and each medication which you give intravenously will add to the volume status. You have to also maintain the nutrition of the patient. So in such a patient, when he is in AKA and when the urine is not coming out, the kidney is not diuresing, you start the renal replacement therapy so that you can give all the fluids and the nutrition and the antibiotics, whatever you want to give to maintain that. So again, for fluid overload, you have to start RRT. So these are the absolute indications for starting RRT. One is hyperkalemia, which is life-threatening, severe acidosis, pulmonary edema, and severe uremic complications like encephalopathy, seizures, and pericarditis. Now, so volume control, we said nutrition. So if you're not able to give adequate nutrition with the present fluid intake, you start RRT and liberalize the nutrition. Similarly for drug delivery and solute modulation. So what are the theoretical advantages and disadvantages of dialysis modality? So what are all the renal replacement therapy modalities that we have? We have actually 3 modalities which are approved by the Ministry of Health for treating patients with COVID. The first is peritoneal dialysis, which is an acute PD. Next is intermittent hemodialysis, and the third is CRRT. Peritoneal dialysis was widely used in many places. We have seen patients in Madurai and Trichy also who were put in acute PD many years back. This is still a very, very useful bedside procedure, and it can be used for patients who are hemodynamically unstable, for patients who have coagulopathy. But the problem is that the PD catheter, inserting the catheter has got its own risk. The technique is very simple. There is no need for anticoagulation in these patients, and it is very, very cheap. The cost of the catheter is very cheap, and you do not need any expert experience in doing this procedure. Once you instruct the sisters themselves can do the PD. So in a resource limited setting, when you do not have a HD machine or CRRT, when the patient is in severe renal failure with lot of complications, you can still use an acute PD. The disadvantages are that there is protein loss, there is poor clearance, you do not know how much of fluid will come out, how much of urea creatinine will come out. The fluids contain dextrose, so the patient can go into hyperglycemia, the patients can go into peritonitis, and if somebody has an impaired diaphragmatic movement and severe respiratory distress, once you infuse 1 liter of PD fluid into the abdomen, the respiratory distress will worsen. And if you are going to do a prone ventilation, it is technically impossible to do a peritoneal dialysis. So these are some of the disadvantages. Intermittent HT you can do if the patient is hemodynamically stable. The advantages are that you can rapidly remove the toxins and the potassium. Also, it allows downtime for diagnostic and therapeutic procedures. You can do a heparin-free dialysis, so you need not expose the patient to anticoagulation, and it is cheaper than CRRT. But when you are removing fluid, patient can go into hypotension. You will be doing the dialysis typically for 3 hours or 4 hours. And within that time, when you do the dialysis, patients can develop a dialysis disequilibrium. It's technically, you need an RO plant, you need separate plumbing lines for the dialysis, and you need people, technicians or sisters who are trained to do the procedure. So that is the disadvantage. The third modality is CRRT, continuous renal replacement therapy. You can do this in hemodynamically unstable patients. Suppose the blood pressure is very low, patient is on vasopressor, still you can do a CRRT. And patients who have increased intracranial pressure, this modality is preferred. You are continually removing the toxins and you can achieve a good hemodynamic stability. You can easily control the fluid balance and you can do without anticoagulation. The machines are user friendly and a critical care nurse who is trained to operate the machine can do. The main disadvantage is that it's extremely costly. 24 hours of CRRT, the consumable cost comes to around 25 to 35,000 rupees. So it's an extremely costly procedure and it is a long procedure. So the clearance of toxins is slower compared to hemodialysis. The Ministry of Health guideline recommends either point of care intermittent hemodialysis at the bedside of the patient or a CRRT or a PD. These are the three recommended modalities of renal replacement therapy for a corona patient. So first you need a vascular access. For doing a hemodialysis or CRRT, you need a hemodialysis catheter in one of the bigger veins, either the jugular or the femoral vein. And you have to, for the dialysis catheter insertion, you do it under ultrasound guidance. And you can start the RRT with an uncuffed non-tunnel dialysis catheter. It is called a double lumen hemodialysis catheter. That is the one which is preferred. The first choice is the right internal jugular vein. Second choice is femoral. Third is left internal jugular. Subclavian vein is preferred the last due to increased incidence of subclavian thrombosis and also injury and pneumothorax. So once you start the dialysis, you need to know whether the dialysis is adequate, whether the uremic clearance is adequate. So these are the recommendations. These might be a little bit above for at this present stage, but in further sessions when we go into the depths of dialysis, then you will understand. For now, if you know that in hemodialysis, you need to achieve a KT/V of 3.9 per week, or when you are doing a CRRT, you need to achieve an effluent volume of 20 to 25 ml per kg per hour. This is the recommendation for AKI. So whatever is the RRT modality you are choosing, it should fit the patient's needs. It should be available with you. If you do not have a CRRT machine, there is no point in talking about it. You should have the clinical expertise to deal with it. You must have the financial backup. You get the CRRT machine, but you are not able to get the CRRT cassettes and consumables, which are going to cost 35,000 per day. It doesn't make sense. And your health system. So depending on what you have, you choose the modality and you get experienced in it and you offer it to the patient. So one good thing about the kidney is that in contrast to the heart and brain where ischemic injury results in permanent cell loss, the kidney is able to completely restore its structure and function even after an acute ischemic or toxic injury. Even if the patient goes into an acute tubular necrosis, the renal cells can de-differentiate and proliferate and normal tubular epithelial cells can be formed and the cellular polarity is established and you get a normal glomerulus. So it is worthwhile treating each patient of acute kidney injury with the available renal replacement modality, because once the acute crisis goes off, in most cases, 95% of cases, the kidney will totally recover and the patient will go into a normal lifestyle. So this is, as I told you, this is the initial session. So what all you need to know, you need to have expertise in hemodialysis catheter insertion. You should know how to insert the catheter. You should know about the actual technique of HD, how to perform the hemodialysis. The dialysis nurse who is going to look after the patient should know. You should know what are all the complications which occur during HD and how you will troubleshoot. You should know whether the hemodialysis you have offered is giving results. So you should assess the efficacy of hemodialysis. You should know how to put a rigid PD catheter. If you do not have a hemodialysis machine, you don't have a CRRT at the bedside, you can put a rigid PD catheter. You should know how to do the acute peritoneal dialysis at the bedside. What are all the complications? You should know about CRRT. CRRT is the ideal therapy if you have the machine and the consumables and the expertise and you have learned it. So how you will do the CRRT and what are all the troubleshooting? All these you should know and you should be prepared. And whatever modality of renal replacement therapy you have with this equipment, you should master the technique, and as a team you should be able to deliver it. So I know that it is very daunting for people who have not been exposed to critical care and dialysis and renal failure. All these look daunting, but we are in an unprecedented situation. You must be prepared both professionally and emotionally. All of us have only two weapons, knowledge and resilience. So we are trying to impart the knowledge which is necessary for all of you to tackle the situation. You will not be in an ideal situation like Perambur where we have everything. You are in a remote area where everything is an uphill task, but the administration is trying to arrange everything that you need, the equipment, the consumables, and the knowledge we are imparting. So with these two weapons of knowledge and resilience, it is our duty to treat the patients when they come to us and make them better. So thank you for your kind hearing. And if time permits, if there are any questions, we can take.
Questions? Identify yourself.
This is a very, very preliminary introduction to acute kidney injury, how you will recognize, how you will diagnose, and what you will medically do, and what are the RRT modalities which are available. Subsequent sessions, we will cover each one. We will show also the practical videos, how to do the catheter insertions, how you will start a dialysis, and how you will go about doing the dialysis, and what are the complications, and how you will monitor the patient.
Good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon.
I am Dr. Sharma, pediatrician from Marakonam Divisional Railway Hospital.
Yes.
I have a small doubt, ma'am.
Yes, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, if it is a condition like prerenal AKI,
Yeah.
and as you mentioned, hyperkalemia is a complication of AKI.
Yes.
Can we choose ringer lactate there as a prior modality of fluid for
Yes.
giving
Yes.
fluid of choice?
Yeah. So when there is hyperkalemia, ringer lactate has a little bit of more potassium. So in that case, that is why we prefer plasmalite. Even normal saline, when you give lot of normal saline, the hyperkalemia will worsen, because normal saline will cause a hyperchloremic acidosis and the kidney will start conserving the potassium. So in that case, in a patient with hyperkalemia, the fluid of choice is plasmalite. So plasmalite is very much available, but the cost is around, I think, 8 or 9 times the cost of normal saline. But it is worthwhile indenting few plasmalites and keeping it, and that would be the choice. We do not prefer ringer lactate when there is hyperkalemia.
And if plasmalite is not available for the beginning 1 or 2 boluses, can we use the normal saline?
You can use normal saline. Simultaneously, you would institute measures to decrease the hyperkalemia also. Suppose the patient is unstable, start a calcium gluconate bolus. Stat, you should give 10 ml of calcium gluconate. Of course, with the patient on cardiac monitor, that would stabilize the myocardium. The most dangerous complication of hyperkalemia is cardiac arrest. So then you start a dextrose insulin infusion. If the patient is already a diabetic and his sugars are more than 250, you need not give dextrose. You can give the insulin bolus alone. If the sugars are normal, start a 50% dextrose with 80 infusion with 80 units of Actrapid. Simultaneously, you can give the potassium binding resins. So when you are venturing to treat a COVID patient, you should have normal saline, you should have plasmalite, you should have the potassium binding resins, you should have calcium gluconate, and you should have a dextrose insulin infusion. Of course, dextrose insulin we give in a bigger line. You should not give in a peripheral line, and IV soda bicarb. If the pH is less than 7.2, there is severe metabolic acidosis. Acidosis itself will cause hyperkalemia. So you give 50 ml of soda bicarb over 3 to 4 hours diluted in. So all these measures will bring down the potassium.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Any other questions? Any suggestions? When the patient is fluid overloaded, you can give loop diuretics. As I told you, you can give Lasix. They say around 1.5 milligram per kg. You have to give a high dose of Lasix. We generally give around 80 to 100 milligrams of Lasix so that the patients will start sometimes diuresing and the fluid overload part is taken care of. This is very important in corona because if the patient becomes fluid overloaded, it worsens the patient's respiratory status and hastens the need for ventilator. Similarly, fluids also, there are point of care methods to find out the fluid requirement. What they advise is you should have an ultrasound machine in the ICU because there are two main things in connection with the kidney. One is you are supposed to see the IVC diameter, that we will have a session on how you will assess the need for fluid, whether the patient is volume depleted or not. The second is when you are going to put a jugular catheter, it should be done under ultrasound guidance ideally, so that there is minimal injury to the patient and you also do it in the first attempt and lesser amount of blood splashing around and exposure to the blood and body fluids. So you need to also have at least a small portable ultrasound machine which will be able to show your IVC diameter, the state of hydration. Also, you should be able to see your jugular vein so that you can put the dialysis catheter. So we will have these sessions on, first will be the fluid management, next will be the hemodialysis catheter insertion technique, and then how do you start the dialysis priming, and then dialysis session, then CRRT, and also acute PD. We will try to record it when it is being done in our hospital and show you as video clips if possible, or else try to get some video recordings and put it and then also discuss how it has to be done. So once all these sessions are over, you will be more confident in getting familiarized with these techniques. And then you can, once you do hands-on, then you will be able to know. Once the equipments can come, you can do it hands-on. If not for corona, all these can be used for so many patients. Patients who come with cardiac failure, patients who are in sepsis, and elderly patients with multiple comorbidities all the time land in acute kidney injury. In any critical care unit, 30% of patients will have an AKI. And once you treat the AKI and support, there is a high chance that the patient will recover. So it is our duty to use all these measures and continue the care for acute kidney injury patients in our critical care units and in our hospital, even after the corona pandemic goes off. So if there are no further questions, shall we close this session?
Ma'am, one question.
Yeah.
I'm Dukka.
Yeah.
Ma'am, about any message about plasmapheresis here?
No, plasmapheresis actually means that you are removing the plasma and we actually remove the patient's plasma, put it through a plasma filter where the apheresis takes place. Apheresis means you are removing certain components from the plasma. And once those are removed, you send the plasma back to the patient. So this is mainly done in patients who have conditions like mainly in autoimmune disorders like myasthenia crisis, SLE crisis, and in patients who have TTP, HUS. In these patients, especially if you take SLE crisis or myasthenia crisis, there are a lot of antibodies in the patient's blood. So what we do is the plasma is pushed into the CRRT machine itself can do the plasmapheresis also. You need a special plasma filter, or if you put a plasma filter on the hemodialysis machine, the same way you put a dialysis catheter, you keep the settings and about 2 liters or 3 liters of plasma can be removed and you replace with either fresh frozen plasma or with albumin. In COVID, what they do is they give plasma therapy. That means what they do is patients who have recovered from the coronavirus, mild patients, younger patients, they say that these patients' plasma blood will have the antibodies. So in a severe corona, when everything you have done, supportive measures fail, as a last ditch measure, you can take the plasma from these patients who have recently recovered and infuse it into the patient, with the idea that the antibodies which are present in the plasma of the recovered patients will help this patient fight against the coronavirus, and it will try to help. So there you are just taking the blood from a patient who has recovered, and the plasma you are separating and you are infusing it into the corona patient. This is plasma therapy. Plasmapheresis is where the patient's plasma is taken and all the antibodies, autoantibodies, we try to remove by plasmapheresis and then send back the plasma from which the antibodies have been removed into the patient. For COVID, there are no trials of plasmapheresis. However, plasma therapy from patients who have recovered is being done in many centers. And I think Kerala and Tamil Nadu have asked the permission from ICMR to use this as a therapy for patients who are severely ill. You just take the plasma and infuse it into the vein. Don't need a dialysis machine or CRRT machine for that. For plasmapheresis, you need a machine, dialysis machine or CRRT.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can conclude this session, and thank you all for your patient hearing. And if you have any suggestions on what the next session should be, if you want more classes on acidosis, how to do interpret an ABG, because you will be getting a point of care ABG machine. It will give you some values. If you want to know whether there is respiratory acidosis, metabolic acidosis, how to interpret the electrolytes, how to interpret an ABG, what is acidosis, if you want a little bit more of all those things, we can arrange sessions. Otherwise, we will go as per the schedule I have given. And tomorrow, Dr. Sinharoy would do a session on the practical aspects of ventilatory management. So now we will sign off. Have a great day. Thank you. End.
Just please, get James Pandey and the